Alex Kalia is a copywriter and a columnist for the 3CL Foundation. He's currently working for this, which stands for Commonwealth Center for Connected Learning, 3CL. During his time with 3CL, he has worked on projects which pertain to media literacy for young people, including the Gen Z project, and assisting in the compilation and editing of Young People and Information manifesto. Alex, if you would like to tell us a bit more about that. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Apologies if I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I didn't feel that it was necessary for my conversation with you today. Thank you very much for your invitation. As mentioned, I do work for the Commonwealth Centre for Connected Learning. Apologies for the slightly confusing acronym. What we essentially do at the Commonwealth Centre for Connected Learning is at least I like to believe that we're something of a think tank, but we are also a knowledge hub for cooperative organisations that work with us. And we also act as a safe space for entities and people to come in and have conversations about important issues like the one we're having today. Now, I was originally employed by the Commonwealth Centre for Connected Learning to specifically create content which targeted young people and try to explain, for example, concepts like misinformation, disinformation and malinformation. We started working from the ground up. Now, what this very quickly developed into was we were getting more questions than we were getting answers and results for that matter. One of the main outcomes of 2 years of working with the 3CL is, of course, the Gen Z manifesto of what young people and information. It's complicated. There is, of course, numerous links that you'd be able to find if you go on our website, and it's basically a compilation of quotes, ideas, solutions, identification of problems that were originally collected at a conference held, if I'm not mistaken, just over 2 years ago in Valletta, our capital of Malta. When I originally started working with the 3CL, I had perhaps a slightly disenchanted view of social media platforms. I have to say this didn't really change. I personally have no social media. I made it my life's goal to eliminate social media from my life, primarily because I believe it was affecting my attention span. And we have this conversation quite a lot when we're discussing with at least my management team, what kind of differentiates our relationship. And I hate speaking on behalf of my generation, as do many of my teammates, because we really don't adhere to the Gen Z stereotype, because like what makes us different from let's say anybody born before 1999 in relation to our relationship with tech, is that we grew up with it. We don't know anything different. And as a result, there are a couple of things that tend to differentiate when you're comparing statistics, when you're comparing opinions, and it's just the sheer length of everything. So I personally struggle with this. If I don't read for a month, and bear in mind, I have no social media. If I don't read for a month, I find it difficult to. I'm sure that you guys have the feeling when you read through a paragraph and you have to reread it. It's like it goes into one ear and comes out the other, essentially. And this is a problem because every time that you set foot on these social media platforms, what ends up happening is that you endlessly end up in a feedback loop. A feedback loop that eventually ends up becoming stuff like echo chambers that echo the opinions that we already have about the world. And it furthers a separate debate. Yes, young people may have comparatively shorter attention spans, but the platforms that they are using, we personally haven't launched any research into this, but I was commissioned to work on a piece recently which looked at young people's relationship with self-help culture. If any of you are within my age bracket and you spend a lot of time online, you know what I'm talking about. It's a severe issue. And we came across research carried out by the Pew Research Center a couple of years ago, which was absolutely fascinating. It showed a statistical decrease in trust of institutions amongst young people, which was crazy. Because when we think of people having distrust of institutions, we imagine the Capitol Hill rioters, we imagine what's called the QAnon conspiracy theorists, and the classical stereotypical image of our uncle showing us these really dodgy kind of bits of disinformation. We tell them, you know, you're not media literate. But in fact, the stereotype that I run into is that young people are more media literate than their elders. And I think that we're all kind of equally vulnerable to this. For example, my grandmother sends me TikToks. So in that respect, I don't even use TikTok, but my grandmother does. So I often find myself thinking, like, this isn't something that Yes, it affects young people in a certain way. You know, young people aren't, we don't read as much as we used to. I carry out my own little surveys. I ask all my friends, you know, how many books have you read this year? And they tell me usually one or none, or and if they do, and it's usually some well, it's usually something fictional. It's never something that's, you know, nothing groundbreaking, no Russian literature or anything along the lines of. But what I end up kind of debating with my peers and my peers who are elder than me is how does this really affect us? Like, is it because of us, or is it because of them? And if it is them, who is them? And the consensus that we have reached, at least within my little team where I work, is that I think we are failing to understand what social media is. It's not essentially what classical media is. Classical media can be regulated. Classical media can be held to account. But social media and the, you know, board of directors and their PR teams and whoever comes to essentially argue in their favor will tell you that social media is not classical media. It does not do the same thing. It just gives a platform too, where classical media had its own platform purely because of hardware. Not everybody could own their own radio broadcasting studio or television broadcasting studio back in the pre-digital age, but these days everybody can have a platform. And in this respect, classical media, the media that doesn't adhere to the standards issued by regulators, they kind of don't matter in this equation. They do, in the sense that there are still large swathes of people who consume the media that they create. But at the same time, social media has created a niche for itself. And until we actually understand what social media is concretely, because there is little consensus on this, we will not be able to create useful legislation. We will not be able to create, how do I say, paradigms for understanding it, because it's something that we are inherently tied to, even in how it shapes our opinions about social media. Social media will change our opinions about social media. So I invite everybody today to have a little bit of a think about your relationship with social media, what it knows about you, what you know about the things that it gives you, and most importantly, how we can actually come to a consensus from both sides of the extremely polarized political spectrum on what it is, how to control it, and ultimately the future that we have with it. That's it.